All right, Buck. Great to be with you, man. I'm excited about this episode because we have got a fascinating guest that's going to join us today. We have LSU's Jack Marucci. And this is someone I've dubbed him as the most interesting man in sports because I don't think many people know the whole story, his background, and what he's about. But obviously, as a father of a baseball player and as a scout, you are aware of what Jack's done in two different sports.
Yeah, he certainly is, look, an innovator. And I can only tell you from the dad part of having to go to stores and order these bats that my son has to have, and Marucci bats, and how they've kind of become the bat of MLB, and how, like just the technology and how he's able to do it on his own. It's just a really fascinating story. And so I can't wait to just talk to him, not only about that part of it, but some of the innovations that he's made in football and how it's impacting the game, actually impacting the scouting process.
Yeah, his official title right now is he is the director of performance innovation there at LSU. Someone who, again, has made an incredible impact in the sport of baseball, but in football is really his background, is his primary background, and where he's done some unbelievable innovative work, including what I'm sure some of you have read about Jayden Daniels last year and the use of technology to help in his development. So I won't spoil any more of it, but I'm telling you, stick around for this entire conversation. It is fascinating to see not only a way to kind of learn from the past and information and data that's been collected, but how technology and how the evolution of player development and scouting, where this whole thing is headed. And Jack's right at the forefront of it. So here's our conversation with Jack Marucci. All right, Buck, excited to have him with us here. Someone I know we both have come in contact with on the scouting trails over the years, and someone who I've dubbed, even to him, the most interesting man in all of sports, and that is Jack Marucci. Jack, how you doing, man? Thanks for taking some time for us today.
Oh, man, it's exciting to be here. It's a good-looking morning here in Baton Rouge, and I was looking forward to this.
Well, I'm stoked to have you here because we've been having the same conversation that you've been having, except it's been separate. And then now you've been able to take some action in an area where we've been waiting for something to happen. And that is kind of on the technology side, the innovation side of scouting and player development. Buck and I have been talking about that for years on here, as two former scouts about, how do we make it better? How do we make it more efficient? How can we, aid the process? And it's something that you've really mastered, or have really just been on a quest to master here. Before we get to all the innovation and all that's taking place, though, I'm sure there are some folks who are going to hear your name and they're going to make a connection, and so we should just get that out of the way right at the top. Can we tell everybody about your little bat company, your little baby bat company?
Sure. I guess you can share that also. Yeah.
So for those that don't know, Jack, tell them your background a little bit, your affiliation with LSU over the years, and then we'll get to the latest stuff here.
Oh, good. My background started in southwestern Pennsylvania, Uniontown, PA. Obviously a football area that we grew up in, and went to West Virginia, grad school, Alabama, interned with the Buccaneers, Cleveland Browns. Then I worked with Florida State for 8 years with Coach Bowden. Then been at LSU since '96. Came in, and I originally was a director of sports medicine. So, and I've always had contact with the scouts, which I was so interested in the way every team went about looking at the player, evaluating the player. So a lot of these scouts who I knew from even at the Florida State days, which would be even the late '90s, have worked their way up through the ladder also. But a lot of them are my good friends. I mean, I just enjoyed the process. I think I was very, in tune to what they were looking for, very honest. So there was a real good, synergy there. So the bat side of it, my son, this was about 2002, wanted a baseball bat, a wooden baseball bat. And I called all the companies. I mean, I called all around. No one would make them short enough, even for a major league bat. An inch really is a big deal. But for a young kid, you're trying to get a lighter bat, a smaller bat. And so after all the doors kind of closed and I used my skills from 8th grade wood shop, I bought a lathe from Harbor Freight for about $80 and started cutting in bats. Then the relationships, as I tell people all the time, relationships create opportunities. And we always hear that word opportunity a lot in sports. And I did a commencement speech at the West Virginia a couple of years ago, and I talked about that. And I talked about how you never know who's going to influence you. And mine was the 8th grade woodshop teacher who gave me the skill set to do a wooden bat. Obviously, I'd say still today it's the greatest class I ever took. Mm-hmm. And my relationship with Eduardo Perez, who's on Major League Baseball, who's just a wonderful person, great character guy. When he was with the Cardinals, he was the first one to sneak it in the game, and he introduced me to Albert Pujols and Barry Larkin, and the thing started taking off. And there's a few trade secrets there that allowed us to get the advantage on people. So anyhow, that's the bat story. And we became the number one bat, I think, in 2009 or 10. Louisville had a stronghold for about 100 years on the market. And so my backyard shed was the genesis of that company.
That's unbelievable. But I must tell you, as the father of a kid who plays college baseball at San Jose State, we have purchased many of those bats. Oh. I just shipped them off to Nebraska maybe 15 minutes ago to play in his summer baseball league, and he had a couple of those Marucci bats in his bag in tow. So I feel like I know you without having known you before this podcast. But I must say, like you talked about relationships and all of those things, your courage to go a different path, to think about being an athletic trainer, working in athletic performance, to then doing bats and those things. Where did you get the courage to try a new path?
I think it's in our DNA because, my mom's from Spain. My father's family's from, I guess, the immigrant in us. I always say, because we're willing to take a risk. I think it's in your DNA. And I think the main thing is that you're always I always looked at something and maybe there is a better way to do it. Let's not always say that we've always done it this way. I think that's the thing that we get caught up sometimes in business. I've seen some coaches get caught up in that. And I think you get past if you don't stay, current. But I always liked looking at things from a different angle. And when I took this position from more of the performance and the innovation side of it, I was already doing a lot of it. And Coach O's the one that says, look, there's some things that you did that helped us win some games. And I really never realized that. And he started saying, we were putting guys in position to block kicks. We were putting guys in position for pass rush on 3rd and long based off of drills that we could do to look at who's more efficient on what side. So I think it's just, it came natural with me. And look, I'm only as good as the people around me too. Mm-hmm. And, I'm not that good probably by myself, but, I've always had good help here. I have Mario Macaluso, who does a great job with this, and just brought in Claude Felix, who does a lot of the data collection. So we do a lot of the analytics. We do a lot of the, advanced scouting. So this, all this stuff, it's funny how it all dovetails together.
Now, I'm glad you're leading us in this direction, because this is what I want the majority of this conversation to be about, Jack, and that is the sports performance and the development and technology realm that you have really been passionate about and have really done some incredible things. So and for those that haven't read it, go read the article on The Athletic. There's an article on The Athletic that talks all about Jayden Daniels and what we're going to get into here throughout this conversation about some things that were done there that have helped him, that are going to continue to grow and develop there. But before we get to that, I want to start with, what was the first project that you've done? Because a lot of this revolution has taken place just because you had an idea and it was a project, something you wanted to get into. What was the first one when you kind of transitioned out of just a traditional training role to now, okay, let's use some innovation here?
I think one of the things we did look at, and again, I was working on some of these things, but when I had the full time to do it, we could really capitalize on it. Mm-hmm. One thing I looked at was we call it the 20-year study. We looked at the 20 years of LSU football players that played here. We looked at demographics. We looked at what star rating they were. We looked at production so we could see its starts. We could look at how many games played, special teams. Then the hardest thing to really objectify, which I think we've done a better job, and really was the character of the player. We also looked at how they process the game. And I think that word is very strong, because it was another company that we helped work with was the S2. And that's where you can look at some of the processing. Really, that's designed to put people in the right position. Or does it fit your team? So we start looking at also from guys from different areas of the country, maybe more blue collar, or just looking at everything that we could. Then we looked at the NFL, who signed a second contract. And, you know, it's less than 30% typically. And what were those guys? What did those guys have that the other guys didn't? Now, we know they have talent. If they come here, they have talent. We know that. And you guys have been around the game enough, and you've seen very talented players, and you may have scouted talented players. Why didn't they make it? So these were something that we wanted to tie in with recruiting to find out, why did these teams win? And I was fortunate. I've been part of 4 championship teams, and I can go all the way back to Florida State. If you look at who our leaders were Derek Brooks, Warwick Dunn, Charlie Ward. So guys that I still keep in touch with, very talented players, but look at the character, look at the way they process the game. Then our 03 team, 07 to 19 of the latest team, if you look at that dynamic, that is a very, very, NFL high IQ, high character, and all the demographics seem to fall in place in the chemistry. So this was one of the biggest projects that we really, and it's still ongoing. And I think if you really look at some of these things, because I always said we get seduced by talent because we're guys. We always want to be with the best looking girl, right? I mean, we have to have that, and because our buddies tell you how good she looks. And so we try to justify it. So I think we do that in talent. We want the 5-star guy. It looks good. But if you look at LSU's history, a lot of the 3-stars have been one of our highest producing here and into the NFL. So I think you have to look at the characteristics. I think when we take analytics, I think what people miss on, and I think this is where people get enamored by someone's from a certain degree program, or they can do a certain coding, but really it comes down to, I think it's reverse. It's not just a number. It's really about the person. It's about the individual. And I think that's where we've spent more time in that. Then we can look at the production. Then we can find these things. Because if guys don't make it, it usually typically is a character, or they didn't have the football IQ, or things of not talent. But these are the other parts that we talk about. And I think this project that we're able to do, get it in this database, and we're running these numbers now and continue to add things that we think are going to be a really important piece. So the other bigger things that we looked at, one of the things is the Jayden Daniels piece. I think when you look at that, we had EA Sports on campus here, and this was at least 5 years ago. We were trying, maybe a little longer, maybe 6, but we were trying to use that platform because I had the idea of immersing the player into the game, because if we can get more reps out of somebody, and there is a huge advantage of seeing something. We know that. I mean, that's just natural. I always use some analogies to explain that. But I think if we could do that some way to give it more of a realistic approach. And so this is when the company from Germany, Cognalize, came into our world, and I saw it right away. And I knew if we give them the right direction, and they had the vision too, because they've been unbelievable to work with. And I felt like this could be a game changer. So that was one of the pieces I really believed that, could change. And look, it all starts with the quarterback. We all can look at success. It's predicated in college too. So we really have to study this position. And we've done other metrics too, looking at predictive pieces for quarterbacks. We have a huge database since 2016 with all the quarterback data in it, and we're looking at some more predictive pieces. But we have to really champion the idea. Let's exhaust ourselves to find out what these quarterbacks, how they process the game, what kind of leadership, what kind of character, what is really inside that person. And I think that's where you can start to try to objectify and quantify these things it gives us a little bit better picture, because as you guys know, the draft is so, you hear all these opinions, but I think you can narrow it down if you're starting to look at other pieces. And same thing, we're putting technology in the football. We're looking at a chip that can give us the ability to see if the quarterback's getting better. Is he getting fatigued? If he has an injury that week, is he improving on spin rates, wobble rates, the apex of the throws? I mentioned earlier, we also transition that all into looking at pass rush. We look at
explain the pass rush thing, Jack. Explain to me like what you guys have learned from that.
We created a drill that can simulate a normal pass rush.
Mm-hmm.
We have it where it gives us reaction time and closing speed, and they have to bend at the tip. So now we're putting them into an environment of what we feel like they can give us a clearer picture for third and long, for pass rush. Because if you think about it, and this is how all this stuff ties in. I learned this from baseball, from your dominant eye. I looked at things, how you see the football and which way you want to turn. It's the same thing with pass rush. So a lot of these guys from a stance, maybe we change their stances up to look at what's the most efficient. We look at, from maybe a guy just feels more comfortable on one side or the other, but we can quantify that.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been able to tie that in to, the testing we've done. We had a player named Jay Ward who plays for the Vikings who blocked 4 kicks, but we identified this guy is really explosive off the right side. And he won a game for us, matter of fact. Mm-hmm. And I talked to him, and he says, even in the NFL, I think the first time he had an opportunity to do it, the scouts, listen to our spiel, as we would say, about how efficient he is on this certain side for blocking kicks. So they did it. And I think he jumped off sides on the first game. Then all of a sudden he got a reputation. They said they were almost coming down, almost doubling him, and it freed a guy, and they end up blocking a kick. So I think the things that we can learn, because we don't have that much time with these guys anymore. I mean, we have to identify what their strengths are. Let's capitalize on what they do well. Let's capitalize on things that is going to make the team better. And I think that's, again, we have to find out quickly. And I always say, talk to the player. They really can give you some insights. We had a player, Ty Davis Price. He struggled this was his last season here. This was several years ago. And we did some testing on what type of runner he would be. He'd be probably better counter runner. He was like Leonard Fournette. They operate a little better with a fullback. Mm-hmm. And it's just a way they see the field. They don't press the line maybe as well. And so we looked at the concepts of runs and the formations, and we changed it. I think he got 100 yards against Kentucky. Then look, some of it might be luck. He broke the school record against Florida, and he was averaging almost less than 3 yards a carry. I mean, he was like 3, really struggling. And but again, you're finding the strength of that player. You don't know what you have on your team sometimes until you really dissect and have somebody looking at those things.
Jack, it's so fascinating from so many different standpoints. You talk about Jayden Daniels and what you guys did. I always find it fascinating in talking to young guys, particularly at the high school level, even in college. They would download their entire playbook and play Madden or the old version of the college football game to help get them the reps. It sounds like that you've been able to kind of take that when you're talking about immersing players in the game, but play to, I would say, this young generation's environment where they're so used to doing so many different things, whether it's like the optics and all that other stuff, to help them get better. How has it been received from the players, like getting those extra reps and all of that?
I want to tell you something, but you hit the nail on the head. Here's the other thing. the player's going to have to want to do it. You can't make anybody do it, right? And so you have to think, well, what do they do every day, right? They're on their device. They do play games. But I always say anything that's new or technology, I even did it as an athletic trainer, a new brace would come out. If the player didn't like it or they didn't feel comfortable with it, then it's not going to work. And let's move it let's move a little further. If the coaches don't want to do it, now that all starts at the top. We have a head coach that likes technology. He likes data. Our quarterback coach, Joe Sloan, embraced it. So now when Jayden saw it, he goes, this will work for us. This will work for us. So I think when the player has it on, I have never heard a player say, this isn't something I would not use. We have not, and trust me, we've seen hundreds of players. I've seen NFL players with it on. And I think that's, it's capturing what they have. So think about if you're watching film, just in the room, how we traditionally did it. And I think you still have to watch it. I'm not saying that, but I'm talking about attention. We know basically from an attention span, we may get 30 minutes out of these guys, 20, 30 minutes based off of testing data. And if you have a device on, you're not looking at your phone, you are locked in. I mean, you are locked in and you're watching what's going on. So as we stated, you're immersed on the field. So this device had, and again, this is more AI. We call it VR, but it's really AI on the background. The VR gives you a vehicle to get to it. So we have 800 to 900 plays basically in this playbook, as you were stating. It is on it's on this device. So it allows the player to see different situations. So if it's different coverages, if it's cover one, if it's quarters, dollar or whatever, they can see the safety shift. These are things that we can put into the device after you scout what the teams are doing. We also immersed them into the stadium that we were going to play. So if we were on the road, and the first game we did, it was Mississippi State. They have a very large scoreboard that sits on, it's just like a hitter's eye. So the quarterback, we're trying to give them the feel what's exactly going to be. He knows where the play clocks are now. Now you're taking the edge off of trying to get into that new environment. Remember, Jayden hadn't been on the road. He played one season with us. Then the next group that we were playing, he hasn't seen these stadiums. So we're trying to give him to basically prime your brain to be into this situation. So it gave him a lot more, comfortability to see what it's going to be like on the road. And when we did it for this first game, his efficiency looked really good. Now, again, was this something that was just a fluke? And I mean, we had 2 drops. He would have been like 32 for 34. But he says something to me after the game. He goes, that really made a difference. We need to do more. Now that gets our juices going. So that's when we just kept putting in the game plan on a Wednesday. Then we would put in, we might have about 85% into the system. So after practice, he would rep. He would then get more reps on our Thursday. We would bring in RedZone. We would put in pressures. If we knew guys had different pressures, if they had like cat pressures coming off front of the edge or the corners or whatever it may be, then on Friday we'd go over the whole game plan that was complete. So basically he was playing the game before the game. And I think that's where he was picking up an extra 250 reps per week. So if you think about that, that is outstanding without getting hurt, without, trying to get guys to line up, trying to get guys to put them in the right spot for what you're going to see. So now we've really narrowed the gap in making things see what you're going to, potentially see in the game. I think it taught him, there's a couple things that I think it really allowed him. We knew we wanted him to anticipate better. We knew through some of the stuff, we wanted to improve that. Now, I will say this about Jayden Daniels. He worked hard. He came in the mornings at 5:30. We had a great quarterback coach that gave him the skill set to become a better player. The players around him, we did have talent. He grab those guys and do extra work to develop the chemistry, which I've seen consistently on the good teams. So all that has to be in this equation. It's probably not one thing. I think it's a collective. But I think when he started in this system, we kept bumping up the speed. So he was seeing it at a faster speed. Now, end of the season, we bumped this thing up 70% faster. And he was just seeing it. I mean, how he learned to anticipate. He could throw to the gap where that receiver and DB was going to be. He could throw to the spot. He became so fast because we had an eye scanner in there. We could see what he was looking at. His progressions were just improving every week. His stare down time wasn't nearly as long. He wasn't staring down at the DB. He wasn't staring down at the receiver. And those are objective pieces that we could achieve. So he said to me at the end of the season, we were playing A&M, and I said, "This is our last game. How much do you think this device really gave you the ability to see the field, just to see the field?" And I'm thinking, give me 5-10%. Put some effort in. Give me 5 to. He said 75 to 80%. It changed the way he saw it, and so that's why I said this thing has really made a difference. This is a technology. And if you think about it, now we can build it out. We're working now. The goal is for third down blitz pickup. Looking at protections, which way you're going to slide. Middle linebacker play is incredible because you're going to be able to look at, let's see what they see in the box, safety play. So I also see it as a rehab tool because the cognitive piece, I'm putting on my medical hat on that side of it, but to put guys back into a normal environment where they have to move, shift. Again, you're locked in. You're not thinking about your knee. You're not thinking about your ankle. And that way you can see guys more cognitively are locked in. And so now they have a normal gait. Their kinesthetic awareness is being developed.
There's so many different fascinating areas to this thing. And I had a couple questions I want to ask you. If this is currently possible or eventually possible, when you are looking at an opponent, say you load up everything. Well, you might have teams. You might play, Mississippi State, and the next week you play Alabama. Well, technically they might be running the same defense. They might be running the same coverages, but the difference in athleticism from that free safety from Alabama is going to be different than the athleticism from the free safety of Mississippi State. We have the technology out there, obviously, with GPS to be able to get GPS numbers on guys. We get it as they go through the week of practice. We get it from the games themselves. Can you incorporate that into the device, and that based off your opponent's speed? Like, you might know, okay, I can make this rail shot throw against this free safety from Mississippi State, but the guy from Alabama, based off the GPS, that's going to change your perspective on the same route against the same coverage.
I love the question because it is so insightful. It is wonderful because, yes, the answer is yes. Because we can get GPS on other teams. So the coding with the AI, it is all machine learning and it adapts. But yes, you can make that safety move quicker. Yes, you can make that pass rush guy more dominant coming off that edge. So if you're playing TJ Watt or whoever it may be, Aaron Darnold, yes, you can develop that so that skill set is different. So you can base it off of the talent of that player, because if that's safety, that safety, like you said, maybe one of these teams, that safety just can't get over there, and you can make that throw. Well, now let's change the dynamic where that safety, maybe they are playing something similar, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe they bracket somebody, or they have the ability to be also from a football IQ. You can make a player, maybe play at a different, scope from the way they process. So yes, all these things can be built in to simulate it. Just think about it. If you play a team that you struggle with, say it's just a team from a mental standpoint, well, let's attack that. Let's find out what are things that you struggle with. Maybe it's a certain coverage they play. Maybe it's a hybrid coverage. Maybe now let's put that in there. What it does, it gives the player confidence too. because again, you're playing the game for the game, but it allows them to have more of a comfort when you're going into an environment, and maybe takes away some of those mental blocks that we struggle with. And to me, I go back to the data and data analytics and sports science. I say it's sports common sense, right? It's data. We all want to sound smarter, but when you break it down and use our common sense and things, and look at it that way, I think you really have a lot of advantages working with these technologies.
So basically what you're saying is almost like putting the donut on the bat. You're making it heavier, so then when I remove the donut, it's lighter. I'm a little more advanced. I'm comfortable. As someone who, while you were at Florida State, I was at North Carolina. So obviously we faced each other like the 93 team or whatever.
Yeah.
I worked with Dr. Richard Koop. And one of the things that he did on Friday nights, we did visualization. What he would try and get us as young players to do is to play the game in your head the night before you actually play the game on Saturday afternoon, to think about what you are allowing those players to be able to experience. You basically are allowing them to play the game in slow motion on game day. We always talk about the game slowing down for older players. Well, what the technology is doing is really accelerating their development and processing. So now they're playing comfortably and they're able to be more aggressive on game day because they kind of know what is coming.
I mean, again, so well said. I mean, it is just like perfect what you just said, because the players that last even in NFL, they're so prepared. It does slow down. They don't have to be the fastest guy, but they can play faster. And when you can visualize these things, and this gives you probably the best visualization you could have, because you're visualizing exactly what you may see. It's your offense and the potential of what's going to happen. And you can put a ton of scenarios in there. And I remember playing in North Carolina because that was going to be a rowdy game, rowdy stadium. I mean, I think you guys were in the top 5 maybe. And I mean, those were the Derrick Brooks team. And I remember Coach Bowden that night trying to visualize this stadium's going to be a lot happening. There's going to be a lot of that powdered blue. And I remember him and talking to Charlie and the guys. He always had great team meetings at Friday night. And I remember that. And he talked about the visualization of that game. And I think you're right. It slows things down. I put it this way. I think I use this example. If I live in the woods somewhere and I have all these turns and twists and I'm driving this 1995 F-150, but I can get through there pretty quick. You got a Maserati. I said, hey, Lucky, come over to the house. Now there's a lot of turns, and I bet you don't get out of third gear because it is it's not lit well, but I've repped it. I've repped it so I can play fast. That's the best way I think I can really explain that and for most people to understand.
We talk a lot about quarterbacks and the benefits here, Jack, but I'm just curious, and this is, again, to me, it's all of sports. Bucky and I talk about this all the time, like the spine of your team, is you build your team right through the middle. You think about it in baseball, talk about that all the time. You think about that in football. But I think of not just quarterback. I think of center. I think of middle linebacker. I think of safety, of what a benefit this would be. And I'm thinking about it from a scouting component. Like, are we headed towards the days where you can, instead of us sitting in there for that, generic 15, 20-minute combine interview, when we're parading 3 centers in there, and we've decided our second or third round pick is going to be dedicated to getting our center of the future, and we've got a handful of guys we're going to do our homework on. And instead of sitting there and just talking to them the whole time and have them getting up on the board, we can actually put the device on these guys and show them different fronts, have them explain what they're seeing. Do you see have them react in real time? How do they see the field? How do they communicate in the room? Like, that to me is going to be so much more beneficial on the scouting side of things. And it feels like that's the future if it's not already here.
Again, I love that question because you're right. And you let the secret out. Let's look up the middle. Again, the championship teams we had, that's what we had. You have to start there. Those are cognitive positions. And I think that this can give you a lot of traits that you want to know about that player. You mentioned it, how they call it, how how they can see where the pressures, can they see that? Can they, can they stay calm in those situations? I think, yes, I think you can really learn a lot about that player, because it's no different than when you try to put them up on the board. You have them writing. I mean, I think that's good. I really do. And they write,
But this generation doesn't really learn that way.
They don't learn that way. Look, we based off the studies, I'd say only maybe 20% now.
Mm-hmm.
The other 80, we have to have applied learning. We have to do skill sets that we touch and feel. That's how we learn. I go back to the wood shop, right? There's things I learned in our blue collar school, right? Sew, wood shop, typing. But you're touching it, you're feeling it, and it's going to stay with you longer. The days of just watching a PowerPoint and you watch it and you got to learn it and memorize it, and that's who we think that's smart, though. That's how we look at intelligence, because people can memorize something and get great grades. I'm not saying, but my point is, you have to go further than that. Intelligence is common sense. Are you creative? How you work in a group? How do you lead people? How do you, there's a lot of dynamics that we can't test for until we get out into the real world and do it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how we should be learning. We should be learning more in an applied learning state. And that's where you can put them in that environment to see how they're going to perform, because that's going to be the closest you can get to what it's going to be like on the field. Because everybody can have all these traits too. There's a couple X factors, high anxiety level. You have to have anxiety to be a high performer. But if you're over the top, or you don't have emotional maturity, it can X out all those great traits. So I think those are all things that you have to look at and observe in these situations.
I'm really curious now about the 20-year study, because to me, that sounds like being in a front office of a team. And I know colleges are kind of becoming like that, particularly on the football side. How has, I guess, some of the recruiting directors, personnel people, have they received the study and how have they tried to apply it as it relates to LSU?
It's been very good. It's been very good, because one good thing when you have success, that has to be sets the tone. And fortunately, we've had a lot of success. And as you know, LSU has had a high volume. Actually, LSU has one of the highest sustainability players in the NFL. They are because we looked at all the other schools. And again, I think it's all brought upon, look at per capita, even Louisiana. I think 1 out of 37,000 boys play in the NFL. That is an unbelievable number. The general populations, I think it's 1 out of 130,000. So I think when you start bringing this 20-year study and you bringing all this data together and the success within those numbers, I think it gives it a credibility. Now, that doesn't mean that people aren't still going to, you stray away from things. And that's just the way it is. And look, you can take chances, and sometimes the metrics aren't going to match up on, I'm talking about from a size, speed, like a Tyrann Mathieu. Here's a guy that maybe he doesn't have the 6 foot, height, or maybe he doesn't have, but that's where they can evaluate a player from a different angle or a different lens. And they've always done a good job. LSU always had a great football camp, youth camps, and they started. Justin Jefferson was a 2-star. I mean, these are players that look, I mean, they weren't that 19 team, Cushionberry was a 3-star. Clyde Allaire was a 3-star. Burrow, I don't know, maybe 3, 4-ish. I mentioned Jefferson. Pat Queen was a 3. It wasn't like we had all just these 5-stars. So I give the coaches so much credit by looking past the 5-star, right? Or the superstar, or the biggest and the fastest. So I think that when you show this data, I think we can get past some of the things that maybe some of these biases that you may have. And look, it's a different world now too with the NIL. So that now we are a front office. Now they're you can see what's happening with profit sharing is going to go in effect in 25. So yeah, I mean, you have to start looking at caps, and so it is becoming an NFL model. So a lot of this data that we have would fit perfectly in an NFL club. I mean, it fits like a glove, but we needed it to look at transfer portal. What do these demographics, these players have? And I think that we've done well in the portal. We also look at where these kids were from or born. Because it has a passion to come back here. And that's why when you look at teams of chemistry again, the large population, maybe about 60 to 64% are coming out of the state. And you look at some big programs that put a lot of NFL players. Why haven't they won many national championships? Because I think they've had to get them from all over the country. And you better find the right chemistry. You always hear, and you got to remember when you're scouting, well, tell me, you want to know these different things, how tough they are, or how toughness is always right.
By the way, is there any worse question from a scout than the 1 to 10 question?
Yeah, the 1 to 10.
The scale, the 1 to 10. Really? Are we really? I just remember being in the room when guys would ask those questions and just be like, "This is
embarrassing." 1 to 10. That's right. I said toughness. I said, I think these guys are pretty tough. They're practicing basically on the equator over here. And I said, half you guys only stay for 3 periods and you're gone because it's too hot. I said, I think they're pretty tough. So, yeah, I mean, you enjoy some of these questions and you have fun with it.
Well, go ahead, Buck. Go ahead.
No, I want to ask because I think it's interesting because he's mentioned geography and where guys are coming from. Selfishly, DJ and I can tell you when you're working in pro front offices, there is a bias or there's a feel that some of the best players come from the Southeast, right? Everyone looks to the SEC because of the success that those teams have had as teams, but also the players that have come out of there. In your studies, have you been able to find that certain states, certain regions kind of produce guys that are more likely to be either high-end college players or NFL players?
Yeah, if you look at centers are more Midwest. There was almost 70% from the Midwest. I'm talking about where they're born, not where they play.
I'm guessing with a wrestling background and darn near all of them.
Right. If you look at, we even looked at Notre Dame when Coach Kelly came in, and their highest production was Southwestern Pennsylvania, because our area, we grew up Catholic, most of us, and Notre Dame was a big deal. So there's that passion piece, and a lot of linemen came out of that area. We looked at counties too that didn't have as many resources that you normally have, more rural, and you can see a belt, from the U.S. where maybe more of these DBs came out of. You can see along the coastal. So because we put it up visually on a map. So now, matter of fact, right before I got on, we're doing a whole comprehensive study to even go more in depth by looking at from college to NFL to put it on this map. But we can see positionally. So if you think about quarterbacks, think about California, how many quarterbacks have come out of California?
Yeah.
How many good ones have come out of Southern California? If you pull it up, it's going to be Northern
Cal. Yeah, it's Brady, Aaron Rodgers, it's Goff. They're all Northern California.
Josh Allen, Brady. Yeah. It's amazing to look at some of these things. And I'm talking about the high. I'm not saying there's good quarterbacks there, but I'm talking about the elite guys. Southwestern Pennsylvania put out how many guys if you go through past the years. So, yes, I think you can start looking at these areas. The Navy SEAL we did some stuff with them, and we had a Green Beret that worked on staff. And the simple question was, who comes out at the wash? Not who you're recruiting. Who comes out at the wash? What does their demographic look like? And he says, we get a lot of rural type kids. That's who's probably 75%. And it makes sense because when you're from some of these small towns you see in Louisiana, well, everybody knows you. You can't hide. The teacher knows you. The policeman knows the teachers. Everybody, you're going to maybe have to work a job, So even from Louisiana, the area code 318, which is northern Louisiana, that's where like Kyle Williams, Whitworth, Brady James, Terrace Marshall. I mean, we've had a ton of
West Monroe, man.
Yes, Tre'Davious White. They always have they have a high character rating, and they typically have a higher production. And so even looking at the state so there are these pockets of people that you can see, Massillon, Ohio, or Youngstown. Go look at even the coaching trees, but there's something there. There's something built within some of these areas. Maybe it's the work ethic. There's different areas, and if you look in the Fresno area in California, there's a large population. So there are things that we can dissect and look at where we can give us a little bit better predictive.
It's so fascinating. I mean, I could be really selfish and keep you longer than we already have. We could go on forever here, man.
Yeah,
I want to get you with one final one. My final one from me here. Receivers, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. Obviously, LSU has been a factory. Yeah. And it's not just in terms of, identifying the guys, but there's something in developing them there at LSU. Mm-hmm. And there's also, something in terms of the makeup of these guys. What is it about LSU and that position that's been so wildly successful?
And I tell people, Louisiana kids they are built a little differently. They are. I mean, you can look at the demographic and how they've been sustainable. And I think the competitiveness, when you see them in these camps, all those guys also all had, I will tell you this, because it's confirmed, they all have a very high football IQ. Mm-hmm. If you talk to Malik Neighbors, or you talk to Jamar Chase, or you talk to Odell Beckham, or Jarvis Landry, or Dwayne Bowe, whoever it may be, they can tell you so much about the game and how it's supposed to be played, and they know all the positions. They know, the X, the Y, the Z. I mean, they understand it. The other thing is, I think what comes with that, they are very good in the route running. I think when you have a high football IQ with a route runner, it creates accuracy. It's really reversed engineered. We say, oh, that quarterback's accurate. But guess what? If that receiver has the IQ to understand how the route is supposed to be performed, that creates accuracy for the quarterback. So it's really reversed in some sense. So those guys always, like Jarvis and Odell, would stay in this indoor and throw balls all day. They just love, how we talk about love the game. Mm-hmm. That was another question you always get.
Yeah.
You always say, well, I don't know if he really loves it. He might like it a lot, but these guys.
He likes what the game gives him. He doesn't like the game.
That's right.
That's right. Standard line.
There you go. And you could see the passion. Justin Jefferson would stay in there and just love playing. Again, Justin Jefferson's football IQ was so high. And, I look at a lot of these guys and how they run the route. So we look at route running. What's the efficiency in the route? Can you accelerate and decelerate? That's what made Jarvis Landry good. He ran a 4.7 at the combine, and I think you had some other guys, maybe like Ross, ran these 4.2s, mm-hmm. But Jarvis Landry could get in and out of breaks. He knows how to play the game again. He knows how to look at the route. If it's a choice, he can sit into the coverage. So I think the athletic ability definitely gets you there. We know that. Mm-hmm. But the competitiveness, I think the character of the player a lot of times again. But I think for receivers, one thing we've learned with our data, that position in cornerback, you have to have a high football IQ. It is amazing because we never thought. Now we know the middle, but mm-hmm. Those are really. And here's the other thing with the receivers: we have to understand what is their best position in routes. That's where we have a wearable. We look at from pupil stimulation how the route. If you watch Jamar Chase on some routes, he high pointed a lot quicker. That's because he did. Some of these guys have a bias. Some guys don't. We had a player that didn't quite make it, had some injuries, with Thaddeus Moss. He had no deviation. He had 55 catches, no drops. I think he was the only player that had mm-hmm. over 40 catches that didn't have any drops that I saw. And I just talked to him a couple of days ago. And so, again, he could run multi-route. It didn't matter. So we're always looking at where put these receivers in the right spot too. So I think all that is a little bit behind the curtain there to try to make guys better.
So I know DJ is going to let you go, but I just want to comment on the thing. I think for so long, what you have just done is you've debunked a lot of the stereotypes that would exist in scouting rooms. So a lot of times the perception was the farther they get away from the ball, the less that you needed to worry about their IQ, and it was more about their athleticism when you talk about wide receivers and DBs. But that's contrary to what you're saying. And to me, it makes a lot of sense just based on some of the guys that I played with, Charles Woodson and Eric Allen and some of the smarter guys. They were always the ones that made all of the plays more so than the guys that may be more athletic. And you guys know down at LSU, Patrick Peterson, high IQ guy. Then you talk about the passion part of it. We always in front offices talk about, hey, we want smart, fast, tough, and those things. But I think what we're getting is the passion, which equates to love of the game, high IQ, which means they really understand football really, really well. And then the part that you talk about, high character, guys that not only moral character, but the work ethic, the drive, how they go about their business, all of those things factor into the ones that make it versus the ones that don't.
Well, that's funny you said Patrick Peterson. He was here a couple of weeks ago because he's helped me on. I'm going to get him to help us on the back end. Mm-hmm. Patrick Peterson, I told him this. I said, you're one of the unique human beings because humans are terrible with fame, money, success, the ego. Just, it's the guys that won't text you back. You knew them who they were. All of a sudden, they don't text you anymore. Pat Peterson, I said, not only did you stay humble, but you become more humble. And it really meant something to him. That's the kind of guy. And if you guys look at the rosters of the guys you played with, think about guys that played 5, 6, 7, 8 years. I guarantee you they were the better people. I guarantee they're the ones who studied the game. They're the ones who did those things. That's what starts separating you. And that describes Patrick Peterson to the T.
That's beautiful. I mean, I don't remember the book off the top of my head, but we've talked about it many times on here about hungry, humble, and smart. Like if you want to build a good organization, you find people that have those three characteristics, and that's the way that you've lined this out. Jack, this has been awesome, man. I can't tell you how much we've enjoyed this because, again, we've been talking about there's better ways to do this. We've done that job. We talk about players constantly. We're talking about team building and providing the right culture and the right atmosphere. And there's so many different things that are out there for us to discover to make this a more efficient, more accurate process and to really help these kids more than anything else develop and be their best self. And you're right on the cutting edge, man. And I always enjoy getting a chance to visit with you. I can't thank you enough.
No, I appreciate both you guys' insight. Great questions. I think you guys see it. I can tell. And it's nice to be around like-minded people. It really just makes you grow. And, it's really a neat experience.
Well, we appreciate you so much, man. We appreciate it. Thanks again.
You got it.
Buck, I guess I use this word. It's probably a crutch word for me, but fascinating. I probably use that word a lot, maybe too much, but I don't know how else to describe what we just had in that conversation. I mean, that was unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Fantastic conversation. And, we touched on so many different things, but to me, it is kind of the crystallization of what we've talked about in the team building process. Like every team kind of has their traits and values that they look for in players. But my takeaway after talking to Jack was passion, high IQ, high character. That kind of gets it done. Guys that love the game, guys that are really smart when it comes to football, that really dive into the details of football, and guys that have the right character. You talk about being a good teammate, the camaraderie, the connectivity, the chemistry, how they operate within the building. To me, it appears that those are the traits and the things that scouts should be on the road looking for, because it appears that those guys are the ones that play well and really help your teams play at a higher level.
Yeah, I was just thinking of some numbers that we learned from this conversation. I think about the number 250. Jayden Daniels get an extra 250 reps per week with this unbelievable combination of AI and virtual reality kind of coming together to be able to get those full speed. And not just full speed. He said they had it cranked up 70% above normal speed for him getting those reps. So literally, as you mentioned, the analogy of a donut on a baseball bat, like you get up to the plate You get up to the line of scrimmage, and the game slows down based off the way you've seen it for the entire week. So that 250 number stood out to me. Here's the other number that stood out to me: 30%. I don't know if you caught this when he kind of just snuck this one in there, but less than 30% of NFL players get a second contract. So think about if you were able to improve the way you identify the person as well as the player. So some of those things that we've been talking about here, being competitive, smart, somebody who's, has got character, all those things. Like if you can figure out the person a little bit, maybe that helps you a little bit. If you can take this technology and data information, and maybe that gets you a little bit better. What if you're a team that maybe the average is 30%? What if you got 40% of your players to a second contract? Like that's 10%. That's a difference between keeping a job and losing a job. That's a difference between making the playoffs, not making the playoffs. And it could be the difference between, eventually winning a championship.
I mean, it would just change everything, because so much of what we talk about is for us is kind of mitigating the risks. And so if you could find some core characteristics, some data, some touch points that would allow you to kind of reduce some of the liabilities, you want to do that. And when we think about the best teams are able to kind of keep a core together 4 to 5 years. Well, if you can extend it, that gets you into a second contract for some of your core players. That's what everyone wants, because we have seen the teams that have that continuity and they have that chemistry, they're the ones that are always in the conversation. Now, the pieces change around them, but your core players, if you can find the key ingredients that will allow your core to stay together, it gives you a competitive advantage on your opponents.
I feel like there's a lot of new school in this conversation, but I also think some old school beliefs that I've had, I felt were reinforced by some of the things that he said. I don't know, I'd love to get your takeaway on it, but scouts, we used to go to practice, and some places you go, if you don't know, when you're a scout, you go in to visit a school. There's some programs that they might have more of a closed practice, meaning you can stay out there for stretch and the individual drills, and that's 15, 20 minutes, and then they tell you can't stick around. They don't want you watching 7-on-7 team. That some of these coaches are paranoid, but other programs are wide open. Alabama traditionally was very wide open. USC, when they were in their heyday, Oklahoma, I believe, in their heyday, were wide open, very scout friendly. You can stay, you want to watch all practice, you can watch all practice. And when Jack talked about maybe do your homework and find out the participation in practice as a key indicator. Number one, obviously durability, keep you healthy enough to get out there and practice, but that's also a passion and a want to. And I think you can get more out of a practice than a traditional scouting, bare minimum of just body typing the guy and then being done with it. I think you keep your notebook open. I can see who's passionate, who's got energy on a Wednesday practice when everybody's dragging, who's first in line in drills, who's running around slapping guys on the backside and keeping the juices going. Like those are the traits and the passion component that he was discussing. That not only is, that's good to see. That's a key indicator for how well this guy's going to transition to the next level.
So let's take it there using LSU as an example. Imagine if we could go and watch those practices and we had an opportunity to see Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson and some of those that crew of receivers that went through there. How competitive were their individual drills? How did they look back to back? Who was the leader of the group? Who's the alpha of the group? Who is the guy that may be too cool for school within their group? How do they treat each other? All of those things when it comes to body language and their interactions with their teammates, we can look at that. But also now it's competitive. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, Derek Stingley, who likely got drafted up high because of some of the one-on-one tapes that people were able to look at from his previous years. Well, how competitive is it when it's ones versus ones? Do those guys go at it? What does that look like? What is Joe Burrow like when he's facing off against a very competitive defense and they're barking at one another? Because he talked about that. I want to see all of that. That is the part of practice when we talk about passion and want to and desire. You love those things because the best teams, and right now Georgia's in the midst of it, right? They talk about how competitive their practices are and all of that. The practices are harder than games. Yeah, that's what I want a front row seat to. I want to see that part of it more so than the game, because that'll tell me a lot about what I'm bringing into the building. When he gets to this team, he's going to bring this energy because that's all he knows.
The last thing I was thinking of too is, by the way, side note, I wore number 17 because of Charlie Ward. He was my favorite player growing up. I loved.
He was so
Charlie
good.
Ward.
He was so good. Like he was
a
so
good player. And it was like, to me, as someone who didn't have a huge arm, basically that's didn't have any arm. Charlie Ward wasn't an overwhelming, physical guy. He was just a very efficient. Everything was poise, accuracy. I just thought he looked so smooth. Everything he did was so smooth. But when he was talking about that team, and obviously you played against those guys, but like Derek Brooks, Warwick Dunn, Charlie Ward, we had the lineup in our room in Baltimore, which I believe was the Tony La Russa line, right? When your best players are your best workers and your best leaders, then you've really got something. And man, that's kind of a team that maybe people forget about, the Florida State team. You're going to have a hard time finding three better dudes. Like, look at what these guys have done with their lives, not only just as players, but as human beings. Like, those are three phenomenal people there in those three guys.
So the fact that he was there at Florida State, and DJ, I just wish I could tell you how simplistic the scheme design of Florida State was, but how unstoppable they were. My roommate, Cliff Basketball, was a DB. And I just remember he would come into the room. I was like, hey, man, let me see your scouting report. I've heard so much about Florida State. Let me see what these plays look like. And DJ, it literally is almost like a one-sheeter. It's like 4 passing plays, a couple running plays. And I'm like,
curl flat.
Yeah, it was a swing, Rock Preston or work done out. Someone runs a little China route in a corner. And I'm like, you're hanging 50 points on people running like these. But he was around at a great time. You talk about the great coaches and Bobby Bowden, the great coaches that he's been around during his time at LSU. I just love hearing those stories. And I love the way that he was able to learn from them and how he's been able to apply to what he's doing now to help everyone identify great players.
Yeah, no doubt. Again, I know it was a little bit longer episode today. We don't normally go this long on the off season, but this was a fun one. Just really, really enjoyed it. And we teased it there in our conversation with Jack. We're going to have Andrew Whitworth on tomorrow. So we'll have another episode coming up this week where you guys can check that one out. We'll talk with him a lot about not only his career, but just being a great teammate, what that looks like. What do we mean when we're trying to identify that character trait, and how does it benefit in a championship culture? So look forward to that conversation. Appreciate you guys hanging with us. If you haven't, we do love those those rating and reviews on Apple Podcasts. That is a huge helper wherever you get your podcasts. Those do help us out. We've been doing this a long time. We've got a lot of loyal listeners. So we don't ask often, but we do appreciate those. We'll see you next time right here on Move the Sticks.